Hello and welcome to VU Sports Wired, a very intriguing, incredible edition of VU Sports Wired. I am Cutler Klein. Thank you so much as always for tuning in, alongside Sundaram, Max Schneider. We have an awesome show for you today, talking everything and anything Vandy sports. And what else to start with than the Vanderbilt basketball team? A tough loss, perhaps the toughest of losses yesterday against Kentucky at Rupp Arena, losing by 6, 73-67. Had a 19-point lead at one point in the first half. Really, it's tough to put a loss like that into words, especially given how Vanderbilt's season has progressed. So, I wanted to get your thoughts. How would you break down this loss and chalk it up for Vanderbilt?
Well, this loss literally was a breakdown, and starting with a 19-point lead, and then going into the second half, and that lead started to diminish, and Kentucky really started to cut into that lead. And there was a point in the second half where you kind of knew what was going to happen after that. And it was like watching the Super Bowl a couple weeks ago when the Patriots started to come back, and you just kind of knew that they were going to get it done and they were going to overcome that lead. And that's what Kentucky did. They were slowly gaining more and more momentum, and it really started when they started to press. And Vanderbilt had a lot of trouble bringing the ball up past half court. They turned the ball over a couple times. This was the stat of the night for me. Vanderbilt had 18 turnovers, and Kentucky had 4 steals. That means 14 times Vanderbilt turned the ball over of their own accord. So, offensive fouls, bad passes out of bounds, couldn't secure the ball, 10-second violations. So, a lot of things that really shouldn't happen late in games. They looked like they were overcome by the big moment and kind of broke down to that defense. Another thing that was interesting was Matthew Fisher-Davis finished with 0 points, and he's a guy who's kind of been the workhorse of this offense early in the season, was averaging up to 18 points a game at one point. They looked to him for scoring. These past few games, not only have they not looked to him for scoring, they've kept him on the bench for a while. This game, he only logged 18 minutes, and that was in part because Nolan Kressler fouled out. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been in the game down the stretch. So they weren't able to look to him for scoring. So they ended up taking a lot of deep threes and ending possessions like that. So, great start to the game, but couldn't get the job done towards the end.
Yeah, watching this game was kind of like watching a fish swim in a river, and you see the kingfisher above, and you're really hoping that the fish makes it. But then at a certain point, the kingfisher just swoops down, and you just lose all hope. And you really got this nature feeling when you watch the Kentucky start to press Vandy on every inbound play. Because first of all, you see a guy like Fox pressing Riley LaChance. And again, the Vanderbilt players are talented, but it must be such a luxury for Coach K to just put these athletically gifted people out there and say, just go cover him and make sure he doesn't get the ball. And then on top of that, Vandy had one inbound play that they ran at least 7 or 8 times in a row. And it was literally just inbound the ball to Luke Cornett, a player that has great ball handling for a person that's 7 feet tall, but also has a handful of turnovers in the last minute of games that have been decided by 1 possession or less. And that wasn't great. And you saw no sense of urgency from the guards moving the ball up the court. And it got to the point where Vandy was playing like a prevent offense. And that would have been great, except they couldn't score the ball. So it was like these meaningless passes for 20 seconds of the shot clock around the perimeter to guards that would pump fake and then not shoot the ball. And then all of a sudden they have 5 seconds left on the shot clock and they're like, oh, we need to get a shot up. And then it's a bad look from 3. And that was the pattern that happened down the stretch of the game. So you see the pressing and Vandy's 8 turnovers to Kentucky's 1 turnover down the second half, and the fact that they just couldn't generate any offense. And it really wasn't much of a surprise that Kentucky came back from down 19.
In the first half, if you watch it, Vanderbilt could have been up by 40 in the first half if they just had slightly better shot selection. They absolutely shut Kentucky down defensively. And then on the offensive end, they were hitting from 3 for a little bit, but they really needed to find a better rhythm. And part of that comes from the guard play. Like you mentioned, Matthew Fisher-Davis, 0 points. I noticed a few times he mishandled passes. He threw errant passes. He seemed like he couldn't even catch what should have been a simple catch and shoot. How much did Fisher-Davis's play make a difference in this game?
Well, it made a huge difference because, players were in foul trouble often. Joe Toye had 4 fouls. LaChance had 4 fouls. Kressler fouled out. So even though Fisher-Davis has been a starter for most of the season, he came off the bench tonight, and when they look for that help off the bench, he's got to be able to provide it, being a team leader in the past. So when he comes off the bench and isn't able to score, shoots only 4 shots, all threes, misses all 4 of them, that puts more pressure on these guys to stay out of foul trouble and to be able to continue to score the basketball. And you saw guys pick up the slack there. Joe Toye had 15 points. He was excellent. He hit 3 triples. But you're not going to be able to rely on that from these guys like Joe Toye, who really haven't had a lot of the spotlight for most of the season. So Fisher Davis needs to come up bigger in these moments.
Yeah, I think the problem with Matthew Fisher-Davis is almost exacerbated in a game like the Kentucky game, because you see a player like Malik Monk on the other end, who just decided down the stretch that he was going to take over. And then he had the and one. He had a turnaround 3 that was in the face of one of our defenders. And you see Matthew Fisher-Davis in contrast to that, and that just it shines a big light on one of the problems, and that is guard play. And down the stretch, you had 0 dribble penetration. And you were talking about the stat earlier before we started filming, but like Luke Cornett, he leads the NCAA like all time for big men 7 feet or taller, like in number of threes. And he's gonna make threes when they're in rhythm, when they're good shots. But if Luke Cornett shooting a 3 is Vandy's only form of offense, then he's gonna have nights where he goes 0 for 9, and then you can't do anything after that.
I mean, it looked like the press and the way they were pressuring Vanderbilt outside of the three-point arc in the second half really shut them down. I found myself on the TV a number of times, and I was shocked that they didn't get more 10-second violations. It seemed like LeChance, when he was carrying the ball up, just could barely get it over. Had to almost spin move around the guard to be able to make it there. But one other guard that I think started out poorly but then found his rhythm was Peyton Willis, who really carried Vanderbilt throughout some of this game. How great was it to see him try and develop into that point guard role?
Yeah, that was big because you always expect players like Peyton Willis, a guy who hasn't gotten too much time lately, to really be overcome by the moment that is this Kentucky game. Playing in Rupp Arena for a freshman is extremely difficult. The crowd there is loud constantly. You started to see them pick up more and more momentum. So for him to be able to settle in, hit a couple threes in the first half, that was really big for his confidence and this team's confidence, because that was just another player that they could get the ball to hit a big shot. So I think that was big to see these freshmen, because they're going to be the face of the team in a couple years. You're not going to have a 7'1" guy in Luke Cornett to kind of carry this team down the stretch. So Peyton Willis showing up was really big last night, and I think he can start to become that point guard in the next couple years, and he showed a little bit of it.
Yeah, no, you definitely saw that he wasn't afraid of the moment, and going 2 for 2 from three-point range, 8 points off the bench. And it's really good to see because, again, we were talking about the guard play. Having a guard that's coming into his own, finding himself in this huge game down the stretch of the year, that's really refreshing to see for Vandy.
Now, before we move on to talking about their NCAA tournament resume, I wanted to ask you guys, how much does this game exemplify the struggles of watching Vanderbilt basketball at some points? It feels like this was perhaps one of the most Vanderbilt basketball games that has ever happened in the program of Vanderbilt basketball. I don't know, that's just how I saw it. You know, going up big at Rupp Arena and then just finding a way to let it unravel. You can almost just see it snowball throughout the second half. Okay, here we go. It's going to happen. Did you guys find that too?
Absolutely. This was their season in a nutshell in one game. And everything we've talked about them doing well and not doing well all came together. They shot the 3 well, and they shot nearly 40% from 3. And that's something that they've been able to do all season, and that they've been able to win because of it. And they were in this game because of that. They were hitting threes early. They were hitting threes in the second half when they really didn't have any other form of offense. That was able to keep them in this game. Another thing they did well was get to the line and make their free throws. And we've seen that constantly throughout the season. They're good free throw shooters. They're a bunch of guys who are good three-point shooters and who make their free throws. But on the other side of the ball, we saw the same things that we've been seeing. A lot of fouls. Constantly fouling in the paint. Not going straight up with their hands. They checked Jerry Baptiste into the game for a couple minutes and committed 2 fouls on 2 possessions. There was one possession where Kentucky got the ball down the court and Vandy committed 3 fouls on that one possession. So a lot of the same things that we've seen all season, and then struggling to hold on to second half leads. And I'd say the biggest exemplification of that was the Arkansas game, but then again yesterday, a 19-point lead in the first half. That's the biggest Kentucky comeback under Coach Calipari. So to see all of this kind of come together, and Kentucky's a great basketball team, and this is a game that they'll probably win 9 times out of 10, but to see Vanderbilt up in that way, playing their brand of basketball, and then collapsing in the same sense that they have all season kind of brought it full circle.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting because in the first half you saw a really stout Vanderbilt defense. I mean, there was a point when we thought that Kentucky wasn't going to get 20 points in the half, which would have been crazy and would have been huge. But then all of a sudden, Kentucky goes on an 11-point run to close the half, and then you see Vanderbilt kind of settle down into its old patterns. So I think that this was the perfect example of Vanderbilt basketball because you had so much hope and you saw the flashes of all the different types of potential, but then at the end of the day, they just couldn't put that perfect package together, and they couldn't get the job done. And again, a lot of this does speak to how good Kentucky is as a team because you did see individual players take over down the stretch. But like again, there were 2-and-1 plays down the stretch, which is sloppy defense on Vanderbilt's end, but also Kentucky being able to get the job done.
Interesting stat. Vanderbilt has only won once at Rupp Arena, and that was in 2007 when Kentucky was 25th ranked overall. They were, of course, much higher ranked in this one, but still, Vanderbilt has a tough time winning at Rupp Arena. Vanderbilt finishes out the regular season this Saturday at home against Florida, another really tough test against a top team in the SEC. And going into this game on Tuesday, Vanderbilt was climbing back into the bubble conversation for the NCAA Tournament. And after this loss, it might be up in the air. Here are some numbers as to just where Vanderbilt stands on the bubble. But going into this game, they were 48th in the RPI rankings. They had the third toughest strength of schedule. And according to a number of bracketologists, including perhaps the most popular on ESPN, Joe Lunardi, they were one of the last 4 teams in the tournament. So I wanted to ask you guys, at this point in time, given this Kentucky loss and given the fact that no team with 15 losses ever has qualified for the NCAA tournament, which unless Vanderbilt wins the SEC tournament, wins their last game of the regular season, and receives the automatic bid, they will have 15 losses, at least. Do you think Vanderbilt still has a shot at the NCAA tournament?
Well, I think it's kind of nuts because I took last week off from the show, but the last episode that I did, we were talking about Vandy not even making it to the NIT. And then they win a stretch of 4 games, which is a consistency that is unheard of in Vanderbilt basketball right now. They win a stretch of 4 games. One of those games is against a very impressive South Carolina team. So they win those 4 games, and all of a sudden they're catapulted from barely NIT to one of the last 4 into the tournament. But what's really astonishing to me is that all the people that are putting Vandy in the tournament knew Vandy's schedule at the end of the year. And they knew that they were playing Kentucky, and they knew that they were playing Florida. And in my mind, it's hard for me to believe that all these analysts were assuming that they were going to win out. So I see the 15 losses, and I see that not as a big problem because when everyone's talking about them being the last 4 in, I think they saw the schedule and realized that winning out against a Florida and a Kentucky team in Rupp Arena, I feel like that wasn't the most plausible thing to assume. So yeah, I don't think their tournament hopes are gone just yet. And again, they did schedule people like Butler and Dayton, and that strength of schedule is going to be huge when actually determining who's in the tournament. But again, the actual SEC tournament, they're going to go against really tough teams again. So I think it's a wait and see and keep your fingers crossed, but not a whole lot of faith to go off of right now.
I think they're virtually gone, and here's why. I mean, you talked about how there's no 15-loss team has ever gotten an at-large bid. Why is Vanderbilt the team to break that streak? Why? I mean, they're in the SEC, one of the weaker Power 5 conferences. Why not a team like Syracuse that could finish the season with 15 losses but has top 10 wins and has really shown that they've looked like a better team all season? So I don't think Vanderbilt's the team to break that streak. And I also think that Vanderbilt doesn't deserve to be in as a 15-loss team over single-digit loss mid-major teams. You talk about a team like Rhode Island. They have good wins. They have wins on their resume that should be valuable to the committee. And they've only lost 9 games. So going into the tournament, and the committee this season has shown kind of an aversion toward these mid-major teams. When they first came out with their top 16, Gonzaga wasn't even on the 1 line. So I think that they've shown that they haven't paid the most attention to these mid-majors and are really valuing these Power 5 schools. But a team with 15 losses, and they probably will have 15 losses unless they go on to run the table, which would give them an automatic bid anyway. The teams with 15 losses historically don't make the tournament. And so you saw last year, they put Vanderbilt in as a 13-loss team. They put them into the first 4, and they put them up against a mid-major, and they were blown out by 20. So I don't see why this season should be any different or why Vanderbilt deserves to be in. What I will say, though, is that the committee has shown Vanderbilt respect in the past, and Joe Lunardi, as you said, showed Vanderbilt a lot of respect coming into this game. At 16 and 13, that's usually not a tournament record, but their RPI is strong, they have good wins, and so if they beat Florida and win a couple of games in the SEC tournament, maybe they will get one of those last 4 bids. I just don't see them as deserving or that they probably will. I think it's an outside shot at best.
This may be a slightly unpopular opinion, but I don't think I'm the only one to have it here. Is Vanderbilt better off possibly just going to the NIT? Because, I mean, realistically, what might happen here with the NIT versus the NCAA tournament, is it better for the development of some of these younger guys, better for the publicity of the program to win a few games, 3, maybe even 4, go to the NIT finals, possibly win the NIT as a top seed in that tournament, have some home games, get some guys some playing time, play in a place where you are dominant, or go in as an 11 or 12 seed to the NCAA tournament and get absolutely destroyed in the first round of the tournament. I feel like the NIT would be better for the program's development as a whole, and that an NCAA tournament bid would almost create worse publicity than an NIT run would be. Would you guys tend to agree with that, or am I just crazy here?
No, I would agree with that, because an interesting thing when you look at Vanderbilt's strength of schedule, because strength of schedule is really all that we're going off of right now when we're talking about them in the tournament, is that they're 4-7 against top 50 teams. And a lot of the good games that Vanderbilt has that we're evaluating are still losses at the end of the day. I mean, they have 2 really close losses to Kentucky, which are still losses. Again, Butler, Dayton, both losses. So I think that it would be good for the program to finally get some wins under the belt, to go to the NIT, to get the younger players in the rotation, get them postseason experience, postseason exposure. I think it'd be good for the program as a whole to develop that character and that type of depth of experience that we see lacking a lot of the time.
But on the other hand, I think that number is exactly it, 4-7 against the top 50. That means, assuming they lose 15 games, that means 8 losses not against the top 50. Who's to say that when you put them in the NIT, all of a sudden, because they've beaten good teams in the past, they are going to be able to feast on these teams that they really haven't beaten much this season. They have 8 losses outside the top 50. Those are the kind of teams they'll be playing in the NIT. So I think, yes, if they were to be able to make this run, and we kind of knew that would happen going in, that would be better than a flop in the NCAA tournament. But I think the chances of that just aren't high enough, and I think at this point, you'd take the tournament bid as it is, because I think it's good to get these players on a really big stage like the NCAA tournament is, and I think it gives a lot of merit to Bryce Drew's first year with the program. I think to be able to say that he led them to the tournament is something big, and when you replace a coach like you did, you always want that heightened amount of success. I think it looks like a step down when you make the tournament, then you fire the coach, and then the next season you don't make the tournament. So I think regardless of what happens, I'd say the tournament bid is what they should be aiming for. Obviously, it is what they're aiming for. But I think it would still be better for the program. I do see the merits, though, in the NIT if they were able to make a run, maybe get a home game out of that. I'm just not sure how feasible that necessarily is.
Well, I mean, this season, I think we've talked about this before, Vanderbilt came into this with no expectations. The bar wasn't set very high because there really wasn't a bar set. Nobody knew how this team would respond to Bryce Drew as a coach. There were some growing pains early. They seem to have started to figure it out, which means, at this point in time, we said a couple weeks ago, we were talking about whether or not an NIT bid was even feasible. Now we're saying an NIT bid and a high seed in the NIT is a pretty solid bet at this point. But I mean, going forward, with a game against Florida coming up, with the SEC tournament right here in Nashville, aside from winning the SEC tournament, is there any other scenario in which you think Vanderbilt could possibly slide into an at-large spot?
The only other scenario I see is the committee showing a lot of love to a Power 5 team. And not that cheapens the bid, but that's the only other scenario that I see them placing this value on Vanderbilt as a program. And they can talk about the strength of schedule and talk about that as one of the justifications. But at the end of the day, an SEC team does draw more eyeballs.
Yeah, I see one other scenario, and it's obviously other than winning the SEC tournament because that's automatic. I see them, if they were able to beat Florida and then win the first 2, maybe 3 games, probably 2, of the SEC tournament, in doing that, beating a team like Arkansas, South Carolina, or Florida again, probably wouldn't beat Kentucky. But if they were able to beat another tournament team, get another win against the top 50, an extra win, that would put them at 6. If they were able to beat Florida and another one of these teams, I think that could possibly get them an at-large bid. Definitely be playing in the last four in. I imagine, but I think they could pull it off if they were able to beat 2 more top 50 teams.
A really interesting thing about that Florida game, though, is that it's right in the middle of Vanderbilt's spring break. And Florida is a school that historically travels pretty well. So even though that's a home game, I would almost consider that more of a neutral court when you're talking about the mindset of the players.
It'll be really interesting to see this weekend and see how the bracket shapes out. Of course, we will be on spring break when the brackets are released next week. So perhaps right after that, we'll be able to break it all down for you with the basketball team, whether we're talking about an NIT game, NCAA Tournament game, should be a blast no matter what. Now, finally, to wrap up the show, we're going to be talking about some Vanderbilt baseball. A tough weekend for the Commodores and the Vandy boys, losing 2 out of 3 in their series against the University of Illinois Chicago Flames. Lost both of those series losses in extra innings. Is there a cause for some panic here with this team? I mean, this is a top 10 team in the country, losing 2 out of 3 to a team that they've played every single year, it seems like, and have not really lost in this way before. Is there a reason to hit the panic button yet?
Not yet, and I think that's because this is a young team in a program that demands excellence early on, and so these players are coming into a situation where there's a lot of pressure on them to succeed early, and they've lost a few games. But in those losses, there's a lot of things to look to that show promise. I think in the first game they lost to UIC, really, they had a lot of runners that they were just stranding on first and second. And I think that that's something that they'll improve on going forward. They just weren't able to get those timely hits, but they showed an ability to hit UIC's pitchers. So I think that, and the starting pitching is another thing. The starting pitching has been fantastic. Kyle Wright, even in a loss, looked great, really had one blemish, and that was the home run. Raby's got 2 wins under his belt. Drake Fellows, even in the loss on Sunday, has pitched fantastic in his first 2 games, has an ERA that's under 2. So I think the starting pitching has looked really good. They just need to figure things out more in the bullpen, and I think the bullpen is really the biggest cause for concern. One thing that, Tim Corbin's decision to keep Colin Snyder out, to send him out again for the 10th inning after he had just pitched 3 innings, is something that really backfired on them. He let 2 runs. They're struggling to find this presence in the bullpen that's going to be able to carry them through the middle innings because, as you said, those games both went to extras, and they're going to need that strength out of the bullpen. So I think they have things to improve on. Another thing is Jaron Kendall in that series went 2 for 15. And when you talk about one of the best players in all of college baseball, you expect more than that. And that's a series that's going to be more of an anomaly for him. You're really not going to see him going 2 for 15 that often. So I think just the combination of a few things that were uncharacteristic caused those 2 losses. But I will say, last season they were 22-3 out of conference. This season already 3 losses right off the bat. So they do have a long way to go, but they have shown strengths early, and I wouldn't panic just yet.
Yeah, something really interesting about what you just said was that aura of excellence that always surrounds Vanderbilt baseball. And when you have new players, younger players coming into the system, you want them to understand that culture because there is a huge culture of winning with Vanderbilt, and specifically with the Vanderbilt baseball program. And that's why when you talk about the 3 losses already out of conference, that gets a little concerning because you almost feel like if you don't understand what the mindset of the players is, you don't really know if that same type of expectation of excellence is being upheld. But that being said, a lot of uncharacteristic things did happen. Like when I was typing up the script for today, I said, Jaron Kendall had a really, really bad series, but you can also count on him to heat up at some point. And yesterday's game, he hit 2 homers that helped Vanderbilt win that game. So Jaron Kendall being consistent is something that you can count on throughout the series. And again, relief pitching is one of the biggest areas of concern right now. Because when you look at the stats, Colin Snyder gave up 4 runs in 3 innings, and Vanderbilt lost that game 5-3. And Rubenthal gave up 3 runs on 5 hits. So relief pitching seems to be a really big concern right now, and we are getting hits, we are scoring runs. I think today's game might have been the first game when we didn't score first. So I think relief pitching seems to be the biggest issue right now.
One guy I think who's definitely of note was J.J. Bleday throughout the series. He had a few mishaps in the Friday game, but recovered to knock in the tying runs. How big would it be to have Bleday as a solid guy you can slide really anywhere in the order and have him be successful?
Yeah, just a quick update. Bleday just homered minutes ago in this game. So he's really been fantastic early on, and we spoke to Bleday on Friday, and he said that already he kind of feels like he's been in this program for 3 years. And I think that's huge to see a freshman that's made such strides early on. And he's hit as high as second in the order and went 3 for 4 in that game, or 3 for 5. So he's really been good for the program early. He's been able to get extra base hits, had a huge hit against Illinois Chicago that was able to tie that game in the 8th inning. So I think having that flexibility, they've had young guys. They've had freshmen and sophomores. Harrison Ray homered yesterday. So they've had these guys come in and be able to score and hit home runs early on, and that's what Blade's been able to do. So to have a guy like that who's going to be really the future of this team, having success very early is something that's big for this program.
Yeah, I think it's great, especially since he is a freshman, being able to help him grow into that leading role, which is what you can tell they're definitely trying to shape him for, and also being able to have that type of utility hitter that you can place wherever you need to. Because again, like when you're coaching and managing this team, like holes and gaps are going to come up. So having that player you can plug in anywhere and know he's going to be successful is also huge for the team's success.
Well, we will see how the season shapes out, and I'm sure as baseball season ramps up, basketball season winds down, we'll be talking a whole lot more about the Vandy boys. That is going to just about do it for this week's episode of VU Sports Wired. Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. For Max Schneider, Drew Sundaram, I'm Cutler Klein. So long, and we will see you next time.